Right.
I'm out shoveling driveways.
So you've got most of the players at the local and the county level here.
Wow, it's rare when they all come down here. I think we got everybody seated down now. Once again, I wanted to take a minute to welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming out. We are in the midst of this storm, although the Mark, don't make me throw you out.
I'm going wherever you put me.
Right there in the chair. Sit down, be quiet. We're in the midst of the storm still, as I mentioned earlier. Even though the wind has subsided and there is no snow at this present time, we are in the midst of digging out and faced with still a number of different power outages. Here in Barnstable County, but again for the record, my name is Leo Kukunis. I am the chairman of the County Commissioners. We are right now at the old jail facility. That's what we refer to it as, at the county complex. In this complex, we have a room that we refer to it as the wall room. We have a staff that runs it during the storms, and I will actually introduce right now Sean. Sean O'Brien is our department head for that department, and he coordinates all of the efforts for this emergency management center. And I know that the governor and Sean have already toured the emergency center upstairs. As I mentioned earlier, I am going to limit the tours today because we are open and we are moving forward trying to help people. So I hope that the press will help us by indulging us anyhow, and maybe calling back and making arrangements with Sean at a later date when it'll be easier for us to give the press and the public a tour of that room. Any of the elected officials that have not had a chance to go up, you will be allowed to go up today, and some town officials that are here if you're interested in seeing it. So with that, I would like to first of all formally welcome the governor to Cape Cod. I wish we were under better circumstances, sir, to have you down here. But thank you very much for coming down, and I'm going to turn the meeting over to Sean.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Governor, for being here today. So I am the Emergency Preparedness Coordinator for Barnstable County. Over the last 48 hours, we have been responding to the winter event that affected our area, starting yesterday morning and continuing on through yesterday afternoon. We are still dealing with quite a few power outages. We are at a level of about 125,000 power outages in Barnstable County. Our numbers have been fluctuating. Sometimes things do get worse before they get better. We have been down to about 90,000 at one point. It has gone back up as lines are being re-energized and as the repair crews are working, and they may run into additional issues as well. We also have had undergo sheltering operations. We have opened 3 shelters. The town of Sandwich has opened the high school. We greatly appreciate what the town of Sandwich has done. The town of Barnstable has opened up the intermediate school, helping us out immensely with the Mid-Cape. And then we've also had the Harwich, the Cape Cod Tech School in Harwich open up as well. And they are actually our most populated shelter. Presently, we have 99 people that are in the Harwich shelter. We have approximately a handful, so I'd say 6 or 7 in the town of Barnstable and about 20 to 25 that are in the Sandwich shelter. We're continuing with shelter operations because right now the temperatures, though not really below freezing, are still cold. So it's going to be a little while before we could curtail sheltering operations, and those are things that we will talk about in a little bit. And so that's a quick briefing as to where we're at right now in Barnstable County. Thank you. Governor.
Well, thank you, Sean. And first of all, I just want to start by reiterating something I said to the folks upstairs, which is it's been a pretty crazy couple of weeks for everybody down here on the Cape and across the Commonwealth. This was our 3rd nor'easter in the course of the past 10 or 12 days, and I was doing the math, and by the time we, using the we collectively, restore power to everybody who's lost it in this storm in Massachusetts, overall the Commonwealth will have lost and then restored power to about 1 million households and businesses over the course of the past 10, 12 days, which on some respects is I don't know if that's a record, but for the month of March, it's got to be right up there. The second thing I just want to say is, as we were looking at all of the reports we were getting from the emergency management team over the course of the past few days, we could see that Barnstable County in particular was getting hit a lot harder on the outage side than virtually any other part of the Commonwealth in this storm. And when we were last looking at this, when we made the decision yesterday to come down, I think about half of all of the residents and businesses down here in this county were out, and in some cases you literally had 100% of certain communities out. That has huge consequences for almost everything. It has consequences for not just businesses, but it has consequences for families and schools and the works, which is one of the reasons why Secretary Beaton, this is Matt Beaton, who's the Secretary of Environmental Affairs and Energy, is down here with me today. We called some of the local legislators and some of the folks we know down in this area and said, would it make sense for us to come down and hear firsthand from some folks about what's going on? And that has a lot to do with why we're here, because of the significance of the hit that was taken primarily by this part of the Commonwealth. But I must say, you know, the emergency management crews, the first responders, the health and safety folks across the Commonwealth, the transportation folks, the DPWs at the state level, local level, have been engaged almost on a 24/7 basis for the past 2 weeks on storm damage and storm cleanup and repairs. And it's really been it's been something to watch this all play out and to have a chance to work with so many people who put so many hours into standing the Commonwealth back up again each time Mother Nature did her best to take it down. And I'm looking forward to hearing from some of you folks on what's going on the ground here and where we can be helpful and what types of things maybe we should be thinking about doing on a preventive basis going forward to try to limit some of the impact of these storms in the future. With that, you want to say anything, Secretary?
Thank you, Governor. I'd just like to reiterate the magnitude of what our first responders and our public utilities have been up against over the last 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. We're seeing unprecedented volume of outages, and that work that goes into those restorations takes a great effort, both from the public utilities, but equally as much the partnership on the municipal level. So really what I would like to do is just say thank you to all of the folks on the county level and on the municipal level for all of your coordination and your cooperation to really just that collective effort to get all of the restorations and make sure that health and human safety is paramount and top priority. And over the last couple of storms, and certainly with the most recent Skylar blizzard, we have seen that cooperation and collaboration that, quite frankly, I don't think I have ever seen before. So a big kudos and a big thank you to all of you. And I'd also like to thank all of the linemen and women and the tree crews and the folks that have been, in harm's way, away from their families, working overtime, beyond human capabilities. It has been a very taxing, stressful time, and these folks have put a tremendous effort into this, and the speed of restoration has also something, I think, if it was a measured thing, was unprecedented over the last couple of weeks with the volumes that we have seen and the speed at which those restorations have occurred. Has been a pretty impressive feat, and something I would just like to say a special thanks to all the folks who are working on that effort to get us back up, and doing so in a very safe way, protecting lives and making sure that we put that as the main thing that we're striving for. So thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here with the governor, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Governor and Secretary. for coming down here, and to Sean and your team. We rely on you as legislators. My name is Julian Sear, and I represent the Cape and Islands District. So this encompasses most all of the Cape, Mashpee, all the way out to Provincetown, and then includes Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard and the Elizabeth Islands. All of my district has some level of power outage, ranging from 100% to I think the lowest town right now is at 47% of customers. You know, certainly really concerning. I think several things just came from the shelter that's been set up at the intermediate school in Barnstable. Thank you to the town of Barnstable and the town folks who are here. AmeriCorps and the Red Cross are doing a tremendous job helping folks there. Also at Cape Cod Tech. You know, I think really in a storm like this and through these storms, I think the coordination the Secretary talked about between town level folks, the assistance, and the real unique assistance that we have from our county, which is really strong here. It's a real gift for us here in Barnstable County. And then with the state, I think from a after action perspective, I think we really should be looking at from a utilities perspective, how do we make sure that we get folks, how do we look at what's happened here on the Cape? We are out in the Atlantic Ocean, and so we are a windier place than the rest of the Commonwealth. But really from a resiliency perspective, I've gotten questions and wanting to look at from when the wind died down in my neck of the woods in the Outer Cape. This is about 5, 6 o'clock through the evening. Were we able to get those crews, the utility crews, kind of out there doing that work as soon as possible? There's a restriction. Folks may know if it's blowing over 35 miles an hour, it's not safe for those folks to be there. But really wanting to be looking at that. I think more broadly, the coastal resiliency plans, and I know Governor, you folks are working on speeding up an environmental bond bill that I'm really eager to see and look at. Across this winter, we've seen really significant damage related to unprecedented flooding, unprecedented erosion. The thankful thing about this storm is the tides were in our favor. We didn't have that this time, but we have had that the 3 prior storms. And so I think really looking at all of our coastal infrastructure, whether it be our roads, our harbors, looking at you know, and having hard conversations as well about where we've built things, where we may need to move things. So really looking forward to seeing that. I know how hard your team, and especially Secretary Beaton, is working to get that to the legislature. I think from a climate resiliency perspective, this is the world we're living in. We're going to be facing more and more of this. So really eager to look at that. You know, one thing I do want to raise, and something we that has continued to happen during these storms, which is concerning, is the power supply to Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station. Again, that supply of the 340 volt main lines to the plant failed. So they are on backup generation, but I think that's something we need to be looking at in these storms, and has been ongoing and has been concerning. And I'm sure there's more. Most all of the Cape delegation, which is a really collaborative delegation, is here. Just really want to thank you for taking the time to be here. We have a lot of all our constituents who are in the dark, in the cold, and if you look at the estimates for when power is coming back on, I've heard as late as Thursday or Friday. That's very concerning, particularly given the demographics of our community. We have Barnstable County is the 3rd oldest county in the country, so we have a lot of folks who need help. We're really lucky to have fantastic county and town folks who are making the rounds. Our police stations and our police departments and fire actually call almost all of our seniors to make sure that they're okay. But I think if the utilities estimate is what it is, we've got a lot more work to do in the next few days. Even though the sun is shining and it's a little warm and it's beginning to melt, we've still got some big concerns. So just thank you for being here. I'm sure my partner representing in the Senate here on the Cape, Senator Macedo, Leader Peak, the rest of the delegation has comments as well. But thank you, Governor. Really appreciate your being here.
Thank you, Senator.
Just simply want to thank the administration for the cooperation I've seen with the municipal governments. The Lieutenant Governor reached out to all of us to have conversations about what was happening in our communities, and to you, Governor, and Matt's been already out here twice to assess what's been going on. We just really appreciate the cooperation and coordination, because we do rely on state government and the assets that state government has and the ability to be able to work to get the resources we need to get through this process. So I know we have a lot to discuss, but I've been very impressed over this past, especially this particular year, the cooperation that I've seen happen at the state level to our local communities. You said you were going to focus on municipalities and cities and towns, and I've seen that firsthand, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you very much for working with us, and hopefully we can do the best out of a very bad situation.
He represents, by the way, 2 counties that got hit, number 1 and number 2, Plymouth being the other one. Yeah.
The bridges are still standing, though.
That's right. Governor, I want to thank you for coming down to the Cape today. I think it makes a world of difference in any number of ways to
Look at all the people who are here from Eversource.
Well, that's it.
It's nice to get them all out today.
And I would mention all the trucks that I saw on the highway
Yes.
flowing onto Cape Cod this morning. Not that they want to pump up their numbers or anything in advance of your arrival, but whatever it takes, we're glad that you're here. I think the senators have covered a lot, but something that I want to bring up that I have heard from town managers and administrators, as well as public safety people in my district, which, by the way, is the 4th Barnstable district. It begins at the gray at the elbow and continues all the way around through the pink, the yellow, and the gray at the tip of the Cape. So I have a lot of constituents, probably about 80% of them, who are without power right now as we're sitting in this room speaking. Something that I've heard from my public safety officials is around the well-intentioned but the unintended negative consequences of the automated messages that have been going out from Eversource. Somebody reports an outage, and shortly after that they receive an automated message that says, be prepared to be out 2, 3, or 4 days before power can be restored. And in some instances, I'll say it was in my own personal experience, within maybe 18 hours, power was restored. So although well-intentioned, the effect that this inaccuracy in messaging has on the homeowner and on our communities is it shifts the burden and the cost to our local communities, who suddenly have to arrange and open up warming centers. We have to open up shelters, and in many, based on that message and that information that we're receiving, inaccurate information in many cases. That all comes at a cost. Of course, there's the cost of the psychological trauma, almost like PTSD now when we watch the Weather Channel, I have to tell you. If Eversource can work on the accuracy of their reinstatement predictions, and actually in some cases I think less information rather than more misinformation would be extraordinarily helpful. And then lastly, I just have to ask what our plan is moving forward. I agree with everybody who is thanking the linesmen who are out there in this terrible weather. We see them in the wind and in the snow, and they're going street by street, telephone pole by telephone pole, working unbelievable hours. Nobody has a bone to pick with them. They are doing a phenomenal job. But the more fundamental question is, how can we keep those men and women working their regular shifts in their regular communities and not having to come to places like Barnstable County to restore power to well over 50% of the people? I think moving forward we have to look at how we can increase resiliency of our electrical system. We're Massachusetts, right? We're a leader in the tech sector, and yet we can't supply reliable electricity to people who live on Cape Cod and Plymouth County. It just seems crazy. The number of constituents that I have who have made the decision to spend a significant amount of money, my neighbor, $11,000 to buy a generator for her home, 2 senior citizens who live there. We shouldn't have to be paying the highest electric rates in the country and forking out $11,000 for a generator to guarantee that we have electricity 24/7. I don't know what the answer is sitting here at the table today, but status quo is not acceptable, and we absolutely have to embrace that.
I have to kind of echo a few things that Sarah had to say with regard to the reverse calls from Eversource. I'm still waiting for mine. We reported our outage yesterday afternoon, so it's been about 24 hours. I still haven't gotten my call, but I've gotten calls from other people who have said they have gotten theirs, and we're talking about the multi-duration restoration process. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, Governor and Secretary, thank you both for coming down here, is the thing that most people have talked to me about is cell phone service. And the absolute lack, the total near crash of AT&T. I know everybody who I've talked to who has AT&T does not have service. The people who have Verizon, luckily I have Verizon, we seem to fare fairly well, but everyone that I've spoken to that has AT&T service has not had service for the duration of this storm. And I've heard a number of reasons why. Maybe one of the reasons is that they don't have generators at their tower sites, but I think that's something that we need to look into because as people lose their power and if they're tied to cable systems, then they lose their landline. So what do next? They go to their cell phones. And if they have AT&T, you can't get a hold of them. And for people who are elderly, and we have obviously a large population of elderly people here on the Cape, those people are incommunicado. You just can't get to them. I mean, I've spent most of the day yesterday talking with people who are saying, I can't get to my mother, I can't get to my grandmother, she has AT&T, I can't get to her, so I have to physically get somebody to see if she's okay. I think that's something, Governor and Secretary, that we really need to look into. The responsibilities that the cell phone companies have, because they become the second tier in the line of communication when landlines go out. Yeah, and sometimes first, because a lot of people are giving up their landlines.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Randy Hunt, State Representative, 5th Barnstable District. These last few weeks, including the storm back in January, have been really tough on the seashore areas. The 5th Barnstable District also includes a portion of the town of Plymouth. And by that, I have involvement with the county and the sheriff and the other people that work in Plymouth. And so Plymouth took it very hard. All the South Shore communities took it very hard on this storm before this one. And certainly Sandwich did. I thank Secretary Beaton for coming down to Plymouth as well as Sandwich to see some of the devastation that we had incurred there. And also to the next day, I believe, he took a helicopter ride to see from the air all of the coastal areas to see from a different perspective what's going on there. So everything that we can do to help our resiliency in our shore areas would be appreciated. With respect to this storm and the power outages that we have, it is true. I mean, we can all say yes. You know, if you're in Chatham, you're living 30 miles out in the ocean, we get that. That's how the geography is. But you have to build your utility to withstand whatever the conditions are where you have your utility. And I think that we should not use it as an excuse, but a reason for having Eversource take a second look at how they can reinforce this utility on Cape Cod.
What's Representative Whalen?
Yes,
Would you like to add something to this?
yes, absolutely, Governor. Thank you very much. And Governor, just to...
It's a heck of a haircut you got there, Tim.
Governor, they're going to put as an epitaph on my gravestone that I sat 5 chairs away from you and from Tom Brady when we got our head shaved. So
I could have been wearing my underwear and no one would have noticed. Yeah.
So, Governor, before I get into heaping praise on the many, many good people that have been involved in keeping our community safe down here, I think it is important just to bring out there were some lessons learned, and as you know, those who've been through the NIMS and the ICS protocols fully understand lessons learned are a very, very important thing to come out of here. And Representative Crocker brought up a fantastic point as it relates to the cell phone service with AT&T. Across the street.
That, by the way, was not something that either Secretary Beaton or I had heard about, which falls into the category of this is why it's good to get out of the office.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. And thank you both very much for coming down here, Governor, because you're exactly right. This is how you get the information. I found out about this when I went across the street from me is a young family with a 5-month-old baby. And I didn't hear a generator go, unfortunately. I have a generator. And I went over and checked on them. And they had a fire. They had a gas fireplace. But Todd, the husband, the father, told me that the cell phone service wasn't working. Then I checked on my social media. Fortunately, I have Verizon, and I was able to see that other people were reporting on social media that AT&T went down completely. I'm going to have trouble sleeping at night worrying about what would happen if you have a family like the Pastones, who live across the street from me, having an issue not being able to, obviously there's no telephone landline service because Comcast and Verizon were knocked out, but also with AT&T. And speaking of Comcast, Governor, in that regard, I was notified by a couple of my municipal officials that Comcast went down during the storm as well.
Yes.
So, for instance, the town of Denison, speaking with the town administrator and with the town police chief, we got to a system where the administrator was not able to stay in contact with the Board of Selectmen, the police chief, the fire chief, the town emergency management planner was not able to stay in touch with any of the town officials, the DPW director. There was no way for them to receive the updates that were being issued by the Barnstable County REPC because Comcast was down. So that seriously adversely affected communication. And Governor, what's going to kind of loop in, and this is something that through the great relationship that we have with under Secretary Wood and Brian Merrick over at EOPS, we're able to work through this. Down here on the Cape, the municipal police and fire piggyback for their radio systems. They piggyback on the state police 800 megahertz system. And we know, as we all know, it's going to be going through an upgrade from an analog to a digital system over the next few years. In the town of Dennis, and I believe in adjacent towns as well, about maybe noontime or so, the two towers went down on the 800 megahertz radio system. That caused the towns to lose any radio communication. They were using a backup 400 megahertz radio system, which is very, very spotty. And they were using cell phones. They were resorting to cell phones, which kind of loops us back into the issue as it relates to AT&T. So there, some of the departments almost had to go back to the old school, like when I entered law enforcement back in the days of black and white TV, where you hang around at the station and then you wait for a call and you go to the address, you make the you answer the call, and then you go and you hang out at the fire station or at the DPW, and they'll call you and use a telephone. But then again, it wouldn't even work that well there when the lines are down. So again, we were very, very fortunate through the excellence of our public safety professionals here on the Cape. They were able to work through this, and by the grace of Almighty God, we didn't have any major catastrophes, major life-endangering catastrophes along the way. And Governor, just in closing, thank you, and I also want to thank not only you for coming down here to meet with us, but last night, speaking with the Lieutenant Governor, and the Lieutenant Governor made a point of reaching out to the municipal officials in the towns that I represent to have a personal phone call with them to find out what the needs were and help assess. That was very impressive, and the responsiveness was excellent. It was very well received. I've done a lot of work over the years with Sean O'Brien and the Regional Emergency Planning Council down here. They are absolutely top-notch, and they are supported by great volunteers, as the Senator was mentioning, Red Cross and AmeriCorps, the DART team, so they can bring in animals into the shelters. The Cape Cod RTA has been absolutely fantastic in assisting with transportation, and I can't say enough about the support we received countywide every single storm over and over and over again from Sheriff Cummings and his staff as well. So thank you very much.
Sheriff, do you want to say anything?
Just coming around. I know I probably don't look it, but I've been in law enforcement on the Cape here for over 40 years, and we have the same radio system that we had 40 years ago.
We believe it. We believe it. If we had to guess, never mind. I'm not going there. Yeah.
At least I have all my hair. And we have the same public safety communication system that we had back then, that 800 trunking system. Now I know it's on public safety's radar screen. Secretary Bennett and Undersecretary Wood have both talked to me about it, and one of the issues
it's more than on the radar screen. I mean, we're in the process of going through what will ultimately be a big upgrade, and should have happened a long time ago. Didn't, but we're doing it, and it will take a while to get it all done. But
that's great to hear, because there is definitely a need. I mean, a lot of our towns have dead spots, and in this last storm, we actually had a little bit of an overload, which was some of the problems during the storm that resulted in a lack of communication. So that's all I need.
Yeah, no, that's a big one. First of all, let me just start by saying that about a year ago, we created an executive order specifically to look at municipal vulnerability planning, and that was part of an EO around climate change generally, and And we just put it together, and Secretary Beaton and his team have been working on that, and they've probably gotten maybe 60 or 70 communities through that process, really figuring out what the big issues they face are, and then secondly, what some of the ways to mitigate some of those issues would be. And we fully expect that this legislation we're going to file shortly will make it possible for us to enhance our efforts in this space. And I fully expect after 4 storms in however many, less than 60 days, this is something that'll, you only got 120 days left in the session, guys, but I'm assuming that this will be something people will take quite seriously. But I think one of the things we would like to see is every community with a municipal vulnerability plan in place, and a discussion about what the best way to mitigate whatever their particular issues and circumstances will be, because frankly, depending upon which part of the state you're in, it will vary. And you know, when I talked to Matt about this, we talked about the fact that we want all 351 cities and towns to have a vulnerability plan, even though we have 74 that are actually coastal. You don't have to be coastal to have issues with respect to some of these issues around climate generally. The second thing I would say is I do believe that this will require some creative thinking on our part and on the part of our colleagues in the legislature and in local government, because some of the tried and true tools that people may have used historically around this may need to be different. And having spent some time in a number of communities that were hit pretty hard by some of these earlier storms, I certainly think, Senator, your comment about zoning is going to get into this in a pretty big way, because I visited a bunch of places where, I mean, how high you want to you want a 25-foot seawall? I mean, at some point, you're going to get past the point of reasonableness on this stuff. I really appreciate hearing about some of the issues around cell towers and cell phones. That wasn't something I'd heard about before, but it does help reinforce, first of all, that we need to talk to them, but secondly, that this upgrade we're in the process of pursuing with respect to public safety communication generally will ultimately be a good thing and the right thing to do, although it's going to take a couple of years to actually put it fully in place. I had not heard about Comcast. That's also news. Had you? No. And one thing I would like to ask about is, one of the things we've spent a lot of time working on over the course of the past several years with our public transportation system, and particularly the commuter rail and the rapid transit system, is trees. And we had terrible problems with trees shortly after we took office in 2015 when we had our 28 days of snow. And one of the things we have gotten much more proactive about is reaching out to people who live along these various rail beds and saying, I know that tree's on your property, but it's kind of hanging on to ours and it's leaning a little bit, and we'd sure appreciate it if you'd let us do something to either try and reinforce it or something else. And we've done a ton of pruning and trimming and removing in conjunction with and cooperation with a lot of the folks who are right along the commuter rail routes and the rapid transit routes. And I would just be curious to know if people think there is an opportunity to think differently about trees, because clearly, you know, not all this is about trees. Some of it's about substations, some of it's about transformers, but a lot of this looked like distribution system issues to me, and most of them were, many of them, depends upon what community I'm in, were caused by trees. And in many cases, you look at where those trees are, and I mean, there were big ones that came down. In some cases, you never would have expected trees that size to come down in a storm. But it does make me wonder if there's probably a larger conversation we should be having about trees. I'm kind of looking at you, Secretary, because...
Well, we like trees.
I know, we love trees. Just FYI, okay, we've planted over 10,000 trees since we took office. We love trees.
Just in the right places. No, Governor, you really put the hammer on the nail on the proactive approach to removal of trees or trimming back of trees or treatment of trees and vegetation along rights of way, whether it's on a rail bed or along a utility corridor. I know the utilities have also, over the last few years, made significant investment in trying to get ahead of that. Lessons learned from previous storms, ice storms, and things of the past. That but there are private ownership challenges, and there's always a resistance. Nobody likes to cut down a tree in their yard, but so it is a delicate balance, and something that I think warrants continued conversation and continued proactive approach and continued cooperation and collaboration from both private owners and public officials as well. I think there's more opportunity for us, and I think with every storm, there are, as Rep. Whalen said, many lessons to be learned, and I think trees should, vegetation in general should continue to be a focus.
Yep, Governor, if I may, I think trees certainly something that should be looked at from a topography perspective, especially when you get out to Rep. Peak's district where I live. You actually have the power lines are actually taller than many of the trees, right? Because we have this sort of scrub pine environment. So I think that, yes, it's trees. I think another thing I've heard from folks is old telephone poles. I think we have some pretty, just anecdotally.
We snapped a ton of poles in the previous storm.
Yeah, so I think that, I think, yes, it's trees, yes, it's telephone poles. It's also transformers. I have a neighbor who, their street was out in the last storm for 4 days, and we didn't have a lot of power outages here, and it was because a transformer blew. And it was an old transformer that probably should have been updated, or modernized. So I think, I think common sense strategies, the tree removal piece is important, but also looking at, all right, pole replacement, as Rep. Peak and others are saying, how do we really, and Representative Hunt, how do we build a utility that can withstand these storms? Looking at our grid modernization, we are so much further out on the grid, right? Because we're just where we are geographically. Down the line, there may be wind, projects coming with offshore and wind that your administration's working on that might change that a little bit for us. I should also mention.
Still have some of the same distribution issues. Even if the power is coming from off the water.
Off the wind, yeah. The other challenge I'd be remiss not to mention was for the islands. Nantucket lost power for most of the day yesterday. Nantucket's provided by National Grid provides their power, not Eversource. But there were challenges on the mainland related to major substations, and so the two main power lines that connect to the island both went down. I think in the environmental bond that we're looking at, I think especially for the islands and maybe for some of the more farther flung parts of the Cape, looking at energy storage might be something that could be prudent given technology. And I think there was a project that the administration already was working on that, but I did want to give a plug that the islands have had these challenges, and particularly Nantucket, which is so, you're 26 miles out, so you're really dependent.
Those are great points, and I would just point to, under the governor's leadership, the governor announced earlier in the year a $20 million investment for energy storage.
Yep.
We also have an open docket at the Department of Public Utilities on grid modernization, and all of the things that you just mentioned will certainly factor into that. We have, whether it's our solar regulations, the storage initiative, and all of our other opportunities inside of our regulatory authority, we are trying to come up with any and every way to incentivize things like storage and have these opportunities for islanding of these sensitive areas, particularly like the islands, literally the islands. Eversource is partnering, not partnering, leading with a storage initiative on Martha's Vineyard, really looking at that as a test case for what is possible for us to come up with new technologies and new solutions for us to become more resilient. So as we progress with a lot of the things that, the balls that we have up in the air, resiliency is certainly sort of the leading force in all the decision making that we see.
Thank you.
Excellent. I think we're wrapping things up.
Any of the first responder folks have something they want to add to this?
We appreciate the state support. I'm Phil Simonian, I'm the Yarmouth Fire Chief, and we really value the state support from MEMA and also the county support as well with this Regional Emergency Planning Committee and the Multi-Agency Coordination Center here. Requests for additional resources, they're promptly answered for us, and I just want to say thank you to the state level. I think we had National Guard last storm.
You did.
We did.
That was a huge help.
Big help.
We have a few high water vehicles on the Cape here of our own. Some of the fire departments have got them through the surplus program, which has been fantastic. Some unfortunately weren't in service. They had some mechanical issues, but so it was great to have that additional assets from the state as well.
Good.
Thank you.
Governor, can I just add a couple of things?
Yeah.
As county commissioner, I want to give you a heads up on a couple of things. One is a coastal zone management committee that we are presently trying to reformulate and redesign through an ordinance so that the county will be able to help through a regional effort getting all the towns on board, because every one of the towns has some coastal line here, and it's crazy for all of them to try to work to try to fix their coastal erosion problems, especially without having and coordinating together. I want to just mention that to you because I have you in the hot seat to give you a heads up that the county's moving forward.
Usually when
with that.
someone says they're gonna give me a heads up, it's not usually to tell me something good.
Well, here comes the bad news. I'm not even going to ask you for money at this point. I know at some point that many of the communities probably will, but I'll get to that with my second point. But I do want you to think about and focus on the permitting process. Because many of the communities now have lost parking lots, they've lost seawalls, they've lost beaches. And if we have to wait, even if they have the money, they have to wait so long to go through the permitting process.
People can get waivers right now.
Well, I just want to make sure that we,
Yeah, that was
work
one of
together
the,
that.
there were several local folks who said to us after the first storm back in January
Excellent.
that they needed waivers for public safety issues.
Right. The other thing I want to mention, maybe this goes to the funding source. Is there anything that we can do at the county, and certainly coordinating all the towns to help you apply for some federal aid? I know that federal disaster area thresholds, if you will, are one kind of catastrophic event. We've had a really unusual situation down here. We've had 3 in a row. This particular one, we may not have had a lot of infrastructure damage so much, but maybe if we can work together to try to help you, and I just want to offer your office that certainly the county will help in a regional effort to get anything you need compiled to help us. Towns are looking to, they're collecting brush now for free from their residents, so they're going to be looking at a cost, even if it's a small amount. I think
this is a really important point, because if you look at across the 4 storms and the county, and then working with EOPS has sort of added up the numbers, we've met those thresholds for federal disaster support here in Barnstable and Nantucket and Plymouth. It hasn't added up statewide. And if you look at some of the costs that the towns are dealing with, so Provincetown, for instance, in the storm last week, had 2 abandoned boats that ended up breaking loose and are now like on the breakwater. I mean, they're making for beautiful photographs, but there's a real question in the town about, all right, is it the town's responsibility? Who pays to remove this, to destroy it? What's sort of going on there? I think, is the Coast Guard on it now? But there's well, that's not the town then, I guess, but there are instances like that where towns are asking themselves, have assumed costs, have had infrastructure damage. It's not going to add up for us to get federal support, but we should think about, and certainly we'll work, with the delegation and the legislature to think about, all right, how is there a way to sort of help these folks? Is it through some short-term supplemental appropriations? We got to add that up, but it's definitely something I'm hearing a lot from our towns about.
Okay.
So one thing to your point, I love the way you're thinking about it, and I think the Cape is very unique in its structure with the strong county government. But one of the things that Governor Baker mentioned a moment ago, that MVP program, that Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, it is speaks to all the issues you talked about. CZM plays our Coastal Zone Management Organization plays a critical role in that, and in our statewide hazard mitigation plan that we're underway currently developing. The governor mentioned a commitment to that in the pending legislation. We are also doubling down on this fiscal year right now. We are going to be expanding that program and making an expanded commitment to try to get as many communities in sort of an accelerated RFP in the next couple of weeks. I ask every Cape Cod community to please participate in that, because that is going to lead us to exactly what you're talking about. Give us that collective effort. And I think maybe there's an opportunity for us to look at it a little bit differently on the Cape through the county approach that you were just describing. And if we can get everybody on board and work with the communities, and we'll give you money to help bring in consultants to help us gather all of the information, so we can do that larger, more holistic look at it, to be able to actually develop a strategy of understand the magnitude of the issue and then develop a plan going forward of how we're actually going to attack it. So we can't do it alone. The only way we're going to be successful is all of us working together on the county level, municipal level, and it starts with membership in the MVP program.
Can I just add one thing on the trees? This is state of information, maybe I have it wrong, but I think one of the problems that we face here on the Cape, especially with the old growth, narrow, older roads, for some reason the electric company owns the telephone poles and owns the wires way up high. They send a crew down and they cut the wires up high so their wires are okay.
The trees, yeah.
They cut the trees so their wires are okay. 3 weeks later, the telephone company who rents space on that pole comes through and cuts the tree a little bit more because it's touching the phone wires. 3 weeks after that, another crew comes by and cuts the wires again from the cable company. And then what happens is you have this tree now that is old, that's got like 2 branches that are going out like this with nothing on them, and the storm comes, and now the whole tree goes over.
Right.
I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think if we can just look at the responsibility and expanding it to say, if you're there and the tree looks like it's going to damage even wires other than yours, take the whole thing down. Because we don't end up with these crazy looking trees, and I don't know, something to look into.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is very helpful, and I took a lot of notes, so did the secretary. I would say that I don't know everything about how FEMA works, but we have had circumstances and situations where we have applied on a county basis, not on a statewide basis. You can do that. We can do that. We have done it and gotten money for it. So obviously, if people are collecting the data, organizing it, that's hugely important, because without that, we have no place to go.
They've been great in doing that. Yeah.
Okay.
FEMA's helped.
All right. Thank you. I really appreciate the help, and we'll do everything we can to follow up on much of this.
Great. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Governor.
On behalf of the county, I want to thank all of our members that showed up today.
Thank you very much for coming down.